Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review every Star Trek movie 1 week at a time. In this video I'll cover The Voyage Home. So, what can I say? It's the movie known as the Whale movie. Now, Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, if I remember correctly, has been surpassed, I think, by First Contact, but definitely by the 2009 Abomination, which I'll get to later. But before then, it was the highest grossing Star Trek movie. Now, the other movies, of course, have inflation and taking place in later years, so that could explain why it surpassed in terms of money. I'm not sure if adjusted to inflation, if it is still the highest grossing, but this was a huge hit. Like Star Trek 4, it performed much better than anyone had ever expected, much better than any Star Trek property ever had before. And I covered this a bit in my review for Star Trek Next Generation. The whole reason Star Trek Next Generation exists is because of this film. If it wasn't for the financial success, how much it proved to the execs that Star Trek was a lucrative business, they probably would have never made the Next Generation. In fact, I think it was the studios themselves that pushed for another Star Trek TV show because they saw how successful the films were. And so they thought, well, we shouldn't have abandoned our idea for Phase 2, so we should do a Star Trek TV show. But at this point, the original cast wasn't really suitable for TV, so they had to start with a whole nother cast and blah, blah, blah. I get to more on that in my Next Generation. Point is, Star Trek 4 was... Now, Star Trek 2 is generally known as the best Star Trek movie, and most people, all the fans, the Star Trek fans, will say it's the best film, and in any top 10 list, Star Trek 2 is typically on the top as far as Star Trek movies. But Star Trek 4 is the one that reached a wider audience. If you go to people outside of the Star Trek fan base or Star Trek community, they'd be like, oh, I don't know about that Star Trek thing. Is that the one with Luke Skywalker or whatever? And people like that, they'll be like, oh, I seen the one with the whales. In fact, I did run into a lot of people like this in the 90s when I said, oh, I'm a huge Star Trek fan. They're like, oh, I don't know about that, but I saw the one with the whales. And I remember I remember seeing this in the theaters when it first came out. It was sold out. Like, there were droves of people going to see this movie, and I remember going to Christmas parties, and this would be playing in the background. So this, I think, even to this day, is known as the more sort of wider reaching Star Trek film. And of course, the reason for that is it's a comedy, and it's not just that it's a comedy; it's that it's a very effective comedy. It's a very good comedy. In fact, I would say it's even up there with the classic comedies of the 80s when people look at movies like Ghostbusters or Beverly Hills Cop or any of those classic 80 comedies or Crocodile Dundee. This will be grouped in there as well, and has certainly performed well at the box office as well. And the comedic timing is just perfect in this film. It's just the first quarter of the film, I should say, is dealing with the future storyline. So that's where the part where all the people who aren't Star Trek fans kind of tune out and be like, yeah, let's get to the good stuff. But the bulk of the film is when they're in the 1986, and they have the fish out of water story with these future, people from the future having to deal with modern culture. And Star Trek has tried to do this before and try to do it after. Never to any success. Before was the episode Tomorrow is Yesterday, which is kind of mentioned in continuity because they used the same method of time travel that was used in that episode, the slingshot over the sun. And they kind of just yada yada through that. It's like, yeah, we know how to do this, which, it makes sense. They just want to get the plot going. They don't need to dwell on exposition. But And so, yeah, so that episode tried to do the fish out of water thing, and it didn't really work. It was kind of cheesy. And then you got later stuff with, like, the Voyager two-parter Futures In, which some people do like. I do not, because I think that is tried to duplicate what was done here, but to lesser effect. It just came off as cheesy and unrealistic, and I didn't quite buy it. Whereas here, I totally bought it. Now, watching it again more recently, I can see how when I'm a bit, older and been exposed to a lot of comedy movies and films, I can see how it's a bit formulaic, like the joke. But, and so it doesn't come off as terribly realistic, but it does really work. In fact, when you look at it as a comedy, it works. Sometimes some of the jokes I think are a bit much, and people don't really notice them or remember them because they're just unnecessary. Like when Chekhov is in the coma and he wakes up, he says, "Admiral, I'm Admiral." That does kind of didn't need to be there. Or like when Sulu is flying the helicopter and he accidentally puts the windshield wiper. I mean, come on. I think that was a tired joke even in 1986. Totally unnecessary. But nobody remembers those. They remember all the jokes that did land, such as Scotty going, "Hello, computer," or Spock. Like the comedy timing between Spock and Kirk when they first encountered Gillian was amazing. It just worked so well. It was just one joke after the other. It was just hilarious. And of course, one of the classic lines I remember is when Kirk says, "Oh, I think he did a little too much LDS." And I remember when I first saw that, I was like 7 years old or 9 years old. So I asked my mom, like, what? I didn't get that joke. It went way over my head. It's like, what is he talking about? And she's like, no, there's a drug called LSD. And he was trying to say that, but he got it wrong. Said LDS. I was like, oh, okay. But later years, when I knew what that meant, I thought that was absolutely hilarious, and just other stuff like that. Classic Kirk lines. And of course, the double dumbass on you. Like, again, that was kind of unnecessary, but it has, in terms of like character stories, in terms of realism, but it's funny. It just really works. Now, the other thing I want to get into with this film is it's not just that it's a good comedy, but it's also, this is the third film in a trilogy. And this is something, I think some of the producers involved in the films I think Harv Bennett himself kind of denied this and said, I don't really get why people call this a trilogy. This is very clearly a trilogy to me. In fact, I did a video of top 10 favorite trilogies where I had like the Star Wars trilogy, the original trilogy, the prequels, or the Lord of the Rings trilogy, or the Hobbit trilogy. This is a trilogy: Star Trek 2, 3, and 4. Kind of wish that Star Trek The Motion Picture didn't exist because it doesn't factor in. In fact, they made it very clear with Star Trek 2 that they're just starting over again. And I kind of wish they would have just rebooted it, but I guess this is the days before they did reboots and just had a mulligan on that and called, Wrath of Khan Star Trek 1 and then Star Trek Spock Star Trek 2 and Voyage Home Star Trek 3. That would make more sense. They're the trilogy because they didn't put it in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4. That's why a lot of people don't think of it a trilogy, because it's the second, third, and fourth in a continuing thing. It's not a trilogy, but it totally is a trilogy because it tells the story of it tells a lot of character stories, not just as continuous, because it starts with the Wrath of Khan when the Enterprise crew go out on a training mission with cadets, and then they get ambushed by Khan, and then Spock ends up dying, and they create this thing called the Genesis planet, and then in Search for Spock, they find a way to bring Spock back to life, so they travel back to the Genesis planet to retrieve Spock, but in doing so, they had to violate all sorts of Starfleet regulation and basically become outlaws. They do manage to bring Spock back to life. And then we get to this film, which tells the story of them going home, which is why the film is called The Voyage Home, where they're on Vulcan, but they have to return to Earth to face the music in order to face the consequences of the rules and regulations that they broke, and also dealing with Spock just being brought back to life and how he's coping with trying to rediscover himself. And then, of course, on the way home, this catastrophe happens on Earth, so they have to travel back in time, and they end up saving Earth, so they get off all scot-free. And and so it's a trilogy in that term, but it's also a trilogy in terms of character stories. Like, because Kirk at the start of Star Trek 2 was, feels old and useless and doesn't know what to do himself, but through his, willing to risk it all through his devotion for Spock, he, goes on an adventure, and he ends up saving Earth in this film. And so he ends up put right back where he belongs as captain of the Enterprise, which to me was the perfect ending to this trilogy. And in fact, a lot of people think to see this ending has sort of a leading, or like a cliffhanger, because they're all back on the Enterprise. Let's go on adventures again. But some people, and I can definitely see this point of view, are saying that this should have been the end, the last Star Trek movie, or at least for the original crew. Especially considering Star Trek 5, although Star Trek 6 may change people's mind because that was good and should exist. But but it would have been a good end because it was a good character ending arc for Kirk, because he got what he wanted. To actually see him be captain again isn't as important as the fact that he got to be the captain again, if you know what I'm saying, because his whole character arc was about him trying to find himself and him realizing that he's feeling useless as an admiral, so he gets back in the position. Also, a great character story for Spock, of course, because he dies and then comes back to life and has to refine himself, because in Wrath of Khan we saw how much he had grown since the original series, and how much he had become sort of more human, more attached to Jim. But then after his death, he sort of got wiped clean and went back to the Spock, who was strictly emotional. So he has this character journey in this film, where by the end of it, he's willing to guess and do a lot of human things. Like a great moment, I think, kind of maybe a bit choreographed, but I think really sold it, is when they went to go save Chekhov's life, and Spock was like, is that the logical thing to do? And he's like, no, it's the human thing to do. And I love that. And a lot of other, even the minor characters like Scotty and Uhura, I don't know if I'd say they have character journeys, but they do get their play within this trilogy. So this is definitely, I refer to it as the Genesis trilogy. And I think I even saw, at the store, there was a DVD box set that sold these 3 films and said the Star Trek trilogy. So this is definitely not just a trilogy, it's a really good one, because as I covered, everyone knows Star Trek 2 is amazing, but as I covered, I love Star Trek 3, I think that's underrated, and Star Trek 4 is a great way to end this trilogy. So I think this is one of my favorite. I think I put this at number 2. Or maybe number 3. No, it was number 3, because the Star Wars original trilogy was number 2, and Lord of the Rings was number 1. This is number 3. Favorite film trilogy of all time, yes, even above any of those other stuff like Die Hard or Indiana Jones or anything like that. I love this film trilogy. But anyway, getting back to Star Trek 4 in particular, you got to talk about the big thing here, and that's the whales. Now, this was a bit trendy. This is, the 80s, of course, so it was the days long before the internet or whatever, but it's the equivalent of having the hashtag for social justice, a cause that a lot of people are behind, where they hashtag it. It was trendy. At the moment, it was in the 80s, it was very trendy for the Save the Whales. That was a very common saying, people saying, save the whales, save the whales. Now, I'm not saying that to belittle the cause by any means, because it is something that I do feel needs to be paid attention to, and to this day is still a very important cause. But the way the film handled this was a bit ham-fisted. It was a bit heavy-handed, and I don't think that part of it dates very well. It's a bit sort of shoving in your face, and I have seen a lot of criticism against this film because of that. Like The Tour, for example, they really shove it in your face. Oh, humans are assholes, are horrible, they're wiping them out, blah, blah, blah. And as I said, I agree. I do think what's happening to whales is despicable and is an important moment, but it's just the way that the film handles it. And plus, there's a lot of questions that are answered with the answer because of plot in this film. And since it's a comedy, and a lot of comedies aren't really meant to be taken too seriously, it's mostly forgivable, and I even forgive it for that. But there are a lot of why is the alien probe coming to Earth? Because of plot. Why does it need to talk to humpback whales? Because of plot. And the whole concept of Kirk going back in time, if people can just go back in time whenever they want in the 23rd century, why don't they do it all the time? Oh, fuck. This planet got destroyed. Let's go back in time and save it. Oh, this happened. Let's go back in time and save it. Now, they did make it kind of dangerous for them to do the slingshot thing, but not really. I mean, they made it too easy. I mean, the fact that they were able to just jump, oh, let's go back in time like it was a foregone conclusion makes, I don't know, it makes it a bit too commonplace for my liking. Why don't they just solve all the problems like Superman spinning around the world and going backwards to save Lois Lane? Why don't they just solve all the problems with time travel? But again, because of plot. So it works for the film. Now, I find the end of the film kind of boring because they bring the whales back, plop them in the ocean, and they talk to the probe, and we're just sitting there watching scenes of water falling and whales going, and the probe going, and it's kind of boring. It goes on for a bit too long, in my opinion, and then the probe just goes away. Okay, they're humpback whales here. We'll fuck off now. Now, I know there's a lot of fan theories. There's some non-canon material, like books and stuff, that try to explain what happened here. But none of that matters. Let's be plain about this, because any explanation needs to be in the film itself. And it wasn't in the film itself, so it's not canon. It doesn't matter. And basically what it accounts to is fan-splaining. The bottom line is, the writers of the film didn't care because it's not important. The important thing is having them go back in time, have jokes, ha ha ha, and save the whales. Why the probe is there, they don't give a shit about. They're just like, who cares? Let's just have the probe. I mean, how likely is it that the probe would go to look specifically for humpback whales? I mean, there could be a really interesting, really fascinating explanation to that. But we're not given to it, so it's just a plot device. It's just a MacGuffin. It's just there because, we need the plot requires it. They could have came up with a really fascinating, they could be a really great backstory of why this alien probe, and they don't even have to spend much time getting into it. They could explain it at the end. Oh, this is why. Oh, we understand why. And, alright, here's a huge freaking plot hole. Gigantic. Huge size plot hole in this film for me. Why don't they just use the universal translator? I mean, come on. A universal translator is able to translate a language from an alien race that they just freaking met. We've seen in some later incarnations of Trek like Enterprise, but that doesn't count because it's 100 years before this. And maybe some other stuff, like it happens in Voyager a couple times, where the universal translator takes a little while to figure out their language, but it happened on Deep Space Nine too, but after a while of hearing in this new alien, just for like a couple minutes, they can instantly translate any language, any alien language, and translate it to English instantly. If we can do that, I'm pretty sure it can do it for a species that's been living on Earth for just as long as humans are, if not more. Humans, they've been around, the whole time humans have been around, they've been around. So if they can do it with these new alien thing, a kind of species that out in the galaxy humans had no contact whatsoever, universal translator can instantly translate their language, yet they can't do it to a fucking whale. Sorry, I am sorry, but I do not fucking buy that. And plus, it's just like, we have to travel back in time and get whales so they can talk to him. I was like, Spock, why not just use the freaking universal translator? I mean, even if you could say, the probe would be able to tell it's a translator, not a real whale. So, maybe that's good enough. We don't know. We have no idea because they give no freaking explanation. So anyway, bottom line is, a lot of the plot in this film is kind of just, don't think about it. Don't use your brain. It's just there, MacGuffins, plot device, whatever. Let's just get this plot going so we can have Kirk go back and say, double dumbass on you. But, don't get me wrong. I don't care, because I agree. I think the comedy works so well, and the character stories Not just the comedy, but the character stories work really well. Like, as I said, like Spock, saying we need to go save Chekhov, and the interactions between Jillian and Kirk. And I think Jillian's a really well-developed guest character. Probably one of the best in a Star Trek film. And I was really invested with her, and you could understand her connection to the whales. I in fact, wish I knew more about what happened to her after she left. But again, I'm sure there's books out there. I haven't read any myself. There was this one book called The Probe that went into the background of this alien probe and tried to explain it. And I never read it personally, but I heard it was kind of boring. And in fact, I read this article where the author of the book, or the stated author of the book, said that they totally changed it and only kept like 2 pages of her original work. So I was never that interested. But apparently, like, it had something to do with the Borg or something. Like the Borg assimilated these sea creature worlds, or something to do with V'gers. Well, I don't know. I never read the book, but it sounds stupid. To me, it sounds very convoluted. It should have been explained in the movie itself. If you're not going to explain the movie itself, then it doesn't matter, and I have no desire to read a book about it. But anyway, still love The Voyage Home. One of the best 80s comedies, period, out there. And great character stories, and a great end to a great trilogy. So my rating for Star Trek IV The Voyage Home out of 10 is a 9. Excellent. One of my favorite Star Trek films. Still love it. I can still see why it's the most populous film. It's a film that the general population, at least in the 80s, I think still to this day they think about, the one with the whales. It's a classic film. So yes, still a really great film, but, just don't think too hard about the plot. Anyway, that is it for my review of Star Trek IV The Voyage Home. I will be back next week for my review of the masterpiece that is Star Trek V. Oh my god, I'm going to rip that movie to shreds. Anyway, join me for that next week. Also check out my channel as I do many other Star Trek videos, as well as other videos and other shows like The Expanse, Game of Thrones, Babylon 5, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.